Yeah, scene one, alternate scene one, and there are 32 scenes, but really 24. Many of them are alternate scenes. I want to name all the songs in it so that listeners can look them up and get the whole book.
Well, in actuality, you have it reversed. There are 32 scenes in the rock opera. I dropped some of the scenes in the alternate version. So the main play, if everything was free to be used, it would be 32 scenes plus the reprise.
So the first song is "A Mighty Fortress Is Our God." It was written by the Protestant theologian Martin Luther. It says it's interesting too how many of the songs you change a little bit, sometimes from a male to female voice and vice versa, and also sometimes you amp it up. Maybe you'll make it a little more formal versus some of the more chaotic rock songs. So it's as if you're rearranging some of the songs. But talk a little bit about the use of this song, how it applies. It leads right into the first conversation where they're talking about the Mets game between Danny and Georgie.
Well, I mean, this is the song. I was raised as a Lutheran, and in the 1960s and 70s, there was a show called Davy and Goliath, which was about it was claymation. The same guy who made Gumby ended up making Davy and Goliath, and Goliath was the dog who only Davy could hear, or maybe the other characters could hear him too. The kids could hear him, and it was like lessons like, Davy tells a lie, or Davy throws a ball and accidentally breaks a window, and he has to go, his mom and dad say, Davy, you must tell the truth. Go tell Mr. Cleaver that you broke his window, kind of thing. And it's that kind of thing. So, but that show began with do 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 do, and we would often sing that hymn in my Lutheran church. So that was always in my back. A mighty fortress is our God. Ba, 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 da, da, da. And so those, and it's a very it's not really Gregorian chanting, but it's a very simple kind of song that is sort of leaden, in a good sense. It's an interesting song, but it gives a sense of the implacableness of that kind of belief system.
That leads into the rock opera version, this Temptations Ball of Confusion. Now, I listened to all of the music as I was reading this play, but it should be noted that the cast is the one that sings it. Sometimes they sing it very badly. Sometimes but it's more of a, I think they did a version of Les Miserables where they got non-professional singers, some of them big names, but they weren't as well crafted musical segments. I think this is much the same. And especially Danny, he seems to be the worst of the choirs. He probably has the best mind, but he has the absolute worst voice out of anyone, except for perhaps your sister Christine.
Well, Christine has said in the directions to have a better voice. She just forgets the words, so she'll be, unless it's a song like Kumbaya, which is hard to forget the words, she remembers it. But there is, and this is the first instance where we get a competing thing. Ball of Confusion by the Temptations was, I think, in 1970. It was a big hit, and you end up with basically the hippie crowd singing that song and the religious crowd singing the song, and they sort of go back and forth antiphonally. And again, it's sort of like a competition for Danny. And then we get not only that, but as they're singing it, Danny is subject to seductions by these two supposedly teenage, but they'd have to be played by legal adults. These two stripper girls, the black one Betty and the white one Candy. We don't know any of their stories yet, because this is basically an introduction where probably 95% of the cast is on the stage just singing, like many Broadway musicals, and they're trying to seduce Danny. This introduces the first instance of where Danny is being tugged left and right by different impulses, and but yet both of them are strippers, and one of them is stripping to the Martin Luther song, the other one's stripping to the Temptations.
It then has the quote about it's either the Lutheran Church or the real world. That puts me in mind of the Crime Misdemeanors quote where Mark Lando character is talking to his conscience and says that Jack lives in the real world, you live in the kingdom of heaven. So you get that sort of duality. Then you get the grown Danny intruding into the segment and giving his introduction on the character played by the child Danny.
Yeah, and that's again something that's acknowledging the irreality that this is a work of art, because you couldn't have a 5 or 6, 7-year-old boy, whatever. It's the child Danny is the star, he's in the most of the scenes, but he couldn't be legally in this scene, so it would have to have an adult playing the child Danny being tempted, and then the grown Danny then after that scene comes back in some of the other alternate scenes to explain things and to generally sort of act as almost an stage director.
Then we get another alternate version between Danny and Georgie where Danny says that Georgie's a simple guy, but me, well, I ain't simple. I think about things.
Yeah, and Georgie, again, is a rework. Georgie is a version of Wub from True Life. Georgie Magoo, I call him here. And so he's basically a comic character. There's really not much depth. He was 6 months or so younger than me. And he was just, the fat kid who was constantly eating and had a messy face with, whatever candy he was eating smeared on his face. So
then we get scene 2, alternate scene 2. This is where the class and Miss Judy interact.
Yeah, and this is the first of, I think it's 4 long segments with the battle between Danny and Pastor Stagey. And there was a real Pastor Stagey. The character's name is Martin Stagey, and that's the real guy's name. He died in 1985, and he was a good, as far as I know, a good, solid man. And it's exaggerated the tensions between Danny and his sister. But here we get this Miss Judy, and this is where we find out that the Wagner kids, Danny and his younger sister Christine, are sort of problem children. Danny is the typical wise ass, and Christine wants to do nothing but sing. Let's sing this hymn. Let's sing that hymn. Let's sing blah, 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 blah. And Pastor Stagey, throughout the play, is dealing with this while trying to hide the fact that he can't keep any of these Sunday school teachers more than just a couple of weeks because the Wagner kids drive them crazy. Later on in the play, there's a list of 7 or so Sunday school teachers who either went insane or ran out into the middle of traffic or got impregnated or this, that, and the other thing. And Pastor Stagey is seemingly in a losing battle. And while he seems annoyed at Danny because of his impudence, he seems to fear Christine because he thinks of Christine as sort of like a version of I think it's the Regan character in The Exorcist, that that she's somehow devil, that all she does is want to sing, that she's like the demon child.
The song in this scene is Jesus Loves Me.
Yeah. And
used that song.
Well, I do have a video online on my E-Cosmoetica, Christmas 72 at the Schneiders. And in that, you'll hear Christine. I think she sings 2 or 3 of the songs I used, but one of them is Jesus Loves Me. Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible. And she would sing and she sings this 2 or 3 times in the 30 or 40 minutes of that video, and she just keeps going. That's the way she was. And what I wanted to do to capture in these 2 segments is the Danny and the Christine from that 72 tape recording. Christine doing nothing but wanting to sing, psychotically hell-bent on singing. Baby Jesus. She says baby Jesus probably 24 times in the plays. I love baby Jesus. And Danny arguing something until the very end where Danny and Pastor Stagey have a final sort of philosophical showdown.
Then we get into scene 3, alternate scene 3. This is mostly another conversation between Danny and Georgie. Like you said, Georgie is mostly the comic relief throughout this play. Mary also comes in, and there are so many characters that some of them are just sketched out to define better characters like Danny, but there are some standouts like Candy and Derek. But this one is mostly just the conversation. Sometimes you don't, for the Lutheran version, let's say, we don't have as many songs as we have in the rock opera version. It's interesting too. Did you use songs that were quality music too? Because I find some of them as standalone music probably wouldn't work that well, but within the dramatic uh, use of it in this play, I think they work quite well, especially antipodally to the action.
Well, I mean, in this particular scene, it's "Cross-Eyed Mary" by Jethro Tull, and I wanted this is just to sketch the background. A little bit later on, we get one of the Irving Square Park chessmen, which is a throwback to True Life with Danny and the black guys who used to play chess, the old men. Here, we have another version of some of the homeless people that occasionally have popped up in my memoirs or in some short stories or even in some of the New York Quartet, these brief minor characters. And so I thought, well, if I'm going to have a homeless woman, why not make it Cross-Eyed Mary, which is from the Jethro Tull song. So that's why she's named Mary, just like the redhead girl that Danny swoons over is called Jenny Eccles because of the Holly song.
Then there's another version where you use the poem, let's see, Dilute the Lonely, and we have Danny read that one. It's interesting how you use the poem versions too. Sometimes they're just read straight through, and sometimes, as we'll get in a later scene, Danny is sort of in some kind of psychotic state where he's reading lines of the poem almost as if he's being funneled with the future.
Yeah, and some of them are sort of like he's channeling something. This one is the first use of a poem, and I was just again looking for something to set the scene here. There wasn't exactly song to poem one to one perfect matches. So the alternate versions sometimes will veer a little bit, and that's where I use the grown Danny character to come in and sort of set things back right by explaining things. So, that's also why there's only 24 in the alternate version rather than 32. Is it's a simpler play. It touches many of the same points, but it by its nature it has to be a little bit simpler.
It also ends very poetically right before Georgie farts.
Yeah, he's gonna fart and hit the lights.